And I'm back. Welcome, everybody, to Adventures in History again. So, that was bothering me, and I would not have been able to stop looking at it the whole time that I was streaming, because that's just one of those things that would not have let me go. It would have bothered the crap out of me, so it was just best that I went ahead and got rid of it. Tuna, thank you so much for the subscription. Did we get our, did we get an alert? Did we get Spartacus? Did it play Spartacus? I don't think it played Spartacus. You saw no alert. Well, dadgummit. I wonder if the whole thing just, like, borked when I did whatever I did with the internet. There we go. Tuna, you're Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. Tuna, thank you for being Spartacus. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And there's another Cave Geek sub, thanks to Big Tuna Neil. Tuna, thank you so much for the 70th gift subscription that you've given in the channel. Wow. Much appreciation. Okay, so I was talking a whole lot, and I said a whole lot of things, and basically it's 150 episodes in, which is a big deal for me, because I never thought I would go this far. I never thought that I would keep at this for 3 years, because, you know, I guess there was just a lot of doubt about whether or not this would work out. But you all are awesome, and you all make this worth it. You all are the reason I keep coming back. I really do appreciate you all's attention and your patronage and all of the stuff that you all do to make this work. I could probably sit here and talk to myself, but it would not be nearly as fun without you all around. And I really do mean that. I really do appreciate it, because you all rock. So thank you so much for making it a memorable 150 episodes. Also, this will be the last episode in our current phase. We will wrap up our trip around the world for the 10th century, and when we start over next week on Thursday, we're going to be in a little bit of a different format. Everything's going to look the same. We're still going to have the same sort of discussions, but I'm going to release myself from the rigid 100-year block structure. This is going to allow me to discuss things in a little bit more of a thematic approach instead of a time-based approach. We're going to be able to get the whole story instead of half of the story, and then you having to wait until we get all the way back around the globe to pick up the second half of the story. And I think this is going to help a lot when it comes to things like being able to prep easier, and I think it's just going to be a little bit better for understanding stuff, so that we don't get the really weird cliffhangers where you have to remember what we talked about 4 months ago to make sense again, right? As head of the Parent Teach Association, shouldn't you have run that by us? Oh, I'm sure you can have your say in it, but ultimately I'm sort of like the superintendent and the principal and the school board, so I can kind of do what I want. I think it will actually be better for everybody, though, and I think it's going to be a little bit better, especially for some areas where the history is a little bit slower paced, and I'm going to be able to give you the beginning, the middle, and the end all in one stream instead of the beginning in one stream, the middle in another stream, and the end in another stream. We're still going to be going chronologically, and we're still going to be going by region, but we're going to take it a little bit more as like an era approach instead of a strict century by century approach. So I think this is just going to be better, and I really do think that it's going to expedite some stuff. So it's also going to allow us to look at things that happen a little bit more internationally, which is stuff that's going to be happening much more frequently during this period of history, because we're starting to get to the point where the world even though it's very big, it's starting to become much more connected. So things happen a little bit more rapidly and in different places. And this is going to allow us to look at an event that happens over the course of a period of time instead of just looking at it from one side and then looking at it from another side, that kind of stuff. You're going to make a ranty Facebook post about this. Oh, wow. Make sure to also tag me in it and put sort of like the really bad comments about how I'm a horrible person. You definitely want to include as much ad hominem attack in there as possible to make sure that everybody gets your point, right? You spilled your Starbucks. No tagging, just vague statements about someone. That'll work too, right? That's the polar opposite gripe, right? Where you vague book everything. Okay, but let's actually get started. And we're going to talk about several different regions of the Americas tonight. If you have been with us on any of the previous streams about the Americas, you'll know that we've been following civilizations that have been in about 5 different zones of the Americas, and we will be going through each of those again tonight. We're going to be looking at what's over here around the Mississippi River. We're going to be looking at what's going on over here in the southwest of the United States. We're going to be looking at what's going on here in what is Mexico and Mesoamerica, and then we're going to be looking at what's going on down here in South America. So there we go. And we're going to start here with our eastern area of the continental United States. And we're going to start with a group that is referred to as Mississippian culture. So there are actually quite a few phases of Mississippian culture. And I found this really interesting map here that talks about a lot of the sites. One of the things that's a little bit unfortunate about the particular map that we're looking at is that a lot of these particular sites are not chronologically contiguous. This is a cultural map that shows you where different cultures that are roughly associated with the Mississippian culture are located, but this should not be indicative that all of these places were up and active at the same time. The time period that we're talking about right now, in the 10th century, a lot of these sites that are posted here are not going to be active. This entire culture down here, the Plaquemine culture, doesn't really start up until about 150 to 200 years after what we're going to be talking about. But the middle Mississippian area here and the Caddoan Mississippian area over here, and especially these northern sites in the southern Appalachian Mississippian, and the stuff that's right around in here in the Oneota region are going to be active. What's up, Cliff? How's it going? Welcome, welcome. We're not actually going to talk about a lot of mounds tonight. There are a couple of places that have some that are being built at this time period. This site right down here in Louisiana, Gahagan, that has a couple of smaller mounds that are being built around this time period. Etowah was a site that was active. They may have been building some of their earlier mounds during this period of time. A lot of the really big Mississippian mounds don't start showing up until the period of time between about 1050 and 1100, and then some of the really, really big ones don't start showing up until a little bit later on, until closer to 1150 or 1200. So Cahokia at this point, Brian, is a settlement. So Cahokia is located right here, and it's in modern-day Illinois. It is a settlement, but the really big mounds that you might associate with Cahokia, if you've been there in modern times, were not there yet. The area itself was becoming very important, especially as a trade hub. Cahokia had a really big deposit of a particular type of stone called chert, which was being traded at a fairly rapid pace up and down these rivers. And it won't be too long before Cahokia is established and they start building the really, really big mounds like Monk's Mound, which is the largest Native American mound in the continental United States. You can start seeing that the origins of that, because it went through 3 different phases of building, about 100 or so years after what we're talking about. I'm Spartacus. Nixolotl, thank you so much for being Spartacus. Nixolotl, of course, the artist badge proudly displayed because of the adorable and loving puppy head pat emote. If you have not already followed our friend Nixolotl, you really should. Nixa has been working on some new character design stuff on stream, and you should totally go and hang out and watch the magic happen. Thank you so much for that subscription. It is very much appreciated. Mississippi used to be a much bigger state. Of course, at the time period that we're talking about, Mississippi wasn't a state at all. It was just a big flippin' river. The Mississippi River, of course, was the name of the river, with the Native Americans associating it with Father of Waters, which is what the name Mississippi means, because it was a really big river, and pretty much all of the water within the eastern seaboard drains either into the Atlantic or into the Mississippi, and that's just sort of the way that it goes. What I'm hearing is that this time period was when the aliens were teaching humans about triangles. Sure. If that's what you want to go with, we'll say that the aliens had come down and we're talking about this stuff. So what's going on with the Mississippian culture at this time period? Well, it is on the upswing. It is moving towards being a really big and really powerful culture, but it's not quite at its height. There were people that were living in villages, specifically along the waterways. Mississippi River had become a trade highway, and all of its tributaries were feeding into this larger trade network. And the network itself was going to stretch all the way from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, which is a very impressive amount of space if you remember that we're doing all of this by human propulsion, right? So all the way from here in the Great Lakes, all the way down through the watersheds of the rivers that drain into the Mississippi, and then down here to the Gulf. And you can find things like seashells from the Gulf in sites here, and you can find metal deposits that come from around the Great Lakes down in this part of the area, and it's really kicking up. Prior to the Mississippian period, we had gone through what's called the Woodlands period, where cities that had existed previous had sort of fallen back apart, and people were moving around a little bit more and had sort of regressed on levels of civilization back into much more of a hunter-gatherer kind of thing. But there's going to be some stuff that starts kicking around here, and they're going to invent some stuff like cool new houses. So this is an example of a house that is recreated from archaeological remains at a place called Aztalan, which is in southeastern Wisconsin. And the city itself would have been fairly large, several thousand people in the region. And this is sort of the mud brick with wood reinforced posts kind of thing that you're going to see very common in a lot of other Mississippian areas. People were going to become a little bit more sedentary during this time period because of things like farming. Farming was a bit on the rise, and if we're just sort of looking at what's going on, they're becoming much more capable of producing steady and stable crop yields, right? The concept of agriculture was not something that was new to a lot of these people, but it wasn't something that was what you might call perfected yet. You had understandings of even basic fertilization and things like that, but you need sustainable, repeatable crop yields in order for your population to grow successfully. And there's a lot of trial and error with that. You go through a few years where things don't work out so great, your population shrinks. So during the early part of the Mississippian period, you're going to start seeing better farming happen. You're going to see more land cleared for farming. And this is going to help build the populations of our cities, because our cities are going to be on the rise. My understanding is that the Native Americans were smart enough not to build settlements in the floodplain, the later Europeans not so much. Well, it depends on where you're talking about, Ryan. Some of these cities and some of these habitation sites were built literally in the floodplain and would have been on stilts, or they may have been actually on earthworks that the Native Americans made in order to sort of get themselves up out of the potential flood zone. Uh, it's also fair to state that a lot of the big settlements were far enough away from the floodplain that they didn't have a direct threat of being completely exposed. But there were some smaller villages that were literally right on the water. Places for people to pull in with a canoe and trade and maybe get a good meal and rest before heading off along the river again. Those settlements did exist, but they may have been on stilts. They may have also been on man-made earthworks that kept them up out of the water. But a good question. They may have once or twice stopped by, but eventually get with the times. Everybody's hoeing, right? Exactly. In those days, Netflix was talking about that thing that had happened. Maybe so. Earthworks Jim, perhaps. But it depends on whether or not the magically powered spacesuit fell in the right location for Native American Jim to crawl inside of it. And of course, then you have to worry about the blaster rifle, and you have to worry about, the queen that's coming to get you, and Princess What's her name. All that fun stuff is right there too. What's up, Maddie? Yeah, I've read all of the Earthworm Jim comics, and I played the old games and stuff like that. So I'm right there with you. Freakazoid, yeah, exactly. I know that one too. What's up, Lumpy? Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. All right, so what else do we have going on during this time period? Well, you're going to start seeing the earliest development of regional culture. So each of these areas along the river is going to have a little bit of a personal flavor, if you will. But they're going to start doing the same sort of art, and there's going to be a little bit of an overlap with the Mississippian culture when it comes to artistic styles. And one of the things that's going to be very, very common are things that are anthropomorphized or that are humans dressed up as animals. And one of the things that happens during this period of time is the growth of using copper. So this is a copper plate where people have made a sheet of copper and have hammered into it these designs. And what we have here is a warrior who's dressed up in eagle garb. And he has wings, and you can see here that he's wearing a headdress. This particular copper plate is from a place in Georgia that's called Etowah, which would have been at this time one of the earlier Mississippian cultural sites. And you are going to start seeing a lot more of these copper plates with this beaten copper impression, with stamps cut out, with layers beaten into place. You're going to start seeing a lot more of this. Now, the copper itself wasn't necessarily mined very well. It was much more located in natural outcroppings. There was a little bit of mining that was going on, but especially in the northern part of the Great Plains, not the Great Plains, the Midwest, northern part of the Midwest, goodness gracious, right around the Great Lakes, there had been copper mines that stretched back to the earliest part of the Stone Age for the Native American culture. So they had been doing metal work in that area for a long time, and because of the trade networks that begin to be established during this period of time, you're going to start seeing a lot more people know how to do metalworking, and you're going to start seeing it travel around quite a bit more. So Lumpy says that he is okay, that things are under control. Hey, that sounds pretty great. The first furry convention. Okay, I see what you're saying here. Lots of copper in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Well, yeah, exactly, not anymore. But yeah, the Great Lakes area right around in here had a lot of copper deposits that were just natural and fairly close to the surface. And there had been people working that copper for, at this point, probably more than 1,000 years. So that had been a natural thing up here that starts moving down, and as the techniques grow and people learn how to find this stuff and how to work it, it's going to become much more common in a lot of the places. And when we get back to the Mississippian culture next time, we'll be able to show a whole lot more of those really cool copper plates. And they're really, really pretty. So just in general for our Mississippian cultures, we're on the rise. The cities are growing a little bit. There are becoming more people interested in participating in shared cultural events, especially religious events and trading meetup events. You're also going to start seeing religious ideology that starts to kind of get a little bit more established in the eastern region of the United States. And what's going to happen the next time we come back around is a really big population explosion and cities that are bigger than most of the big cities in Europe contemporaneously. Cahokia at its height had just as many people in it as London did at the same time. So it's heading towards a really big growth spurt, but the place that we're at now is sort of laying that foundation so that the rocket ship can take off. It would be interesting to witness the process of discovering mining as a concept. It's not trivial to do the link between X rock, then melt it, and have a harder material. So that's a great question, and there has actually been quite a bit of work done on the process of early mining and how humans figured out how to do this in the first place. And the current leading hypothesis is that what ends up happening is that people find a natural outcropping of the metal that is at the surface. And they know what the metal is, and they understand that it can be worked in a certain way, so they start removing it. And as they remove it, they get all of the stuff that's on the surface. And then somebody's like, well, I can see down in the hole that there is more of it. And so then they start digging. And over time, what they do is they literally just create a mine from this outcropping that was at the surface at one point, because they just keep digging in and digging in to follow the vein of the ore through the crust of the earth. So that's a very, I believe, believable approach to how a lot of this stuff worked. Obviously, they didn't have a lot of technology that would have allowed them to find anything under the ground ahead of time. There might have been some giveaways where, especially certain metals show up with other particular elements in the crust. Maybe they knew that there was a particular type of metal that was around this sulfur deposit, and every time you found sulfur deposit, there was this other metal. This is a bad example because I don't know if it's applicable, but there might have been other things that kind of gave it away. As to where you might be able to dig to find metal. I put that green rock next to my fire and it leaked orange. Weird. Yeah, right? The concept of metallurgy must have held many steps to its discovery. Yeah, absolutely, it did. And Lumpy, I don't know if you are familiar with the earliest of the viewer request episodes, but we actually did a viewer request episode on the history of metallurgy. And if you give me a second, I can tell you what episode that was if you want to go back and watch it. That was viewer request episode number 12, all the way back in September of 2020. So if you go to my videos collection, it's very hard to navigate that page, but you go to videos and you click on sort by and you pick collections, and then one of the collections is viewer request episodes, and you can find them. I've arranged them by order, so you can just skip to number 12 and watch it. Quartz for copper and gold. Right. And also, hey, Adjunct Collector, good to see you. Most metal ore doesn't really look like metal. That's another good point, Cliff. Didn't people just have fireplaces and notice it started bleeding metal? That's sometimes kind of hard to believe, depending on how hot the fireplaces are going to get, because a lot of ore has a really, really high melting point that your average household fire probably isn't likely to be able to reach. Maybe lightning struck this particular area and it bubbled, right? Like the heat of the lightning melted the ore and the rock, and people were like, oh, if we get that really hot, it'll do this thing. It could have, but the question is, why did you have the kiln? I guess you could say pottery. I don't know. Maybe. I'm sure people played with fire loads as well. Yeah, and making pottery. I'm sure that it happened. I don't know if we know. I think it's fair to say anything is within the realm of possibility as long as it's logical and rational, but I don't know if we know for sure, because I don't think anybody wrote that down. Mining and metalworking was rather more advanced in Europe by this point. Oh, absolutely. So we're talking about the 10th century, which is the year 900 to the year 1000. And by this point, in Europe, they had steel already. And they had, armor plate, and they'd been making swords for 2,000 years almost. No, more than 2,000 years, because they had their Bronze Age in 2600. So yeah, they were way, way ahead. Maybe if your house burned down, maybe so. You want to picture a caveman just throwing everything into the fire just to see what happened. I'm sure Jimmy did that, right? Jimmy was the guy that did everything that was dumb, and people were like, hey, why are you doing that? And then he's like, look, a thing. A thing happened. All right, so let's move ourselves over a little bit to the west and talk a little bit about the Pueblo culture. And we'll spend a little bit more time on them than we will just about any of the other stuff tonight, because they're really hitting their stride during this period of time. And if we look at the map here, what we're looking at is a region that's generally referred to as the Four Corners area. But we're looking at the San Juan River Valley, the Colorado River Valley. We're looking at the Rio Grande, and we're looking at the Little Colorado River. So there are lots of other smaller water sources that feed into these around this area. And in a lot of these places, you're going to find the Pueblo culture. Now, we talked about them previously, and we've talked about this region going back several hundred years. We went through the basket making phases, and we went through Pueblo 1 phase last time. We are now in what's typically referred to historically as the Pueblo 2 phase, if you're just really super interested in Googling a lot of this stuff, right? Did any princes of the time want to party like it was $9.99? Perhaps, but I don't know, maybe. I don't think they knew it was $9.99, because at that point they didn't have a calendar. Or if they did, their calendar wasn't reading 999. They had a really, well, in Europe they had a very poor remnant of the Julian calendar. So things were about to change on that, though. And we'll talk more about that on Tuesday when we talk about the history of calendars. But anyway, in the Pueblo 2 period, we're going to see quite a bit of stuff that's going to change. We're going to see population centers start to grow, and we're going to see what we might call the classic Pueblo-style building developed. And if you know anything about the Pueblo-style building, these are very frequently going to be multi-storied square buildings that are built on top of each other. And you can see here a sort of a diagram, if you will, of what is a fairly typical style house in a region of the northern part of New Mexico that's called Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon is going to be one of the biggest population centers in the Pueblo 2 culture at this time period. And you can see how they have integrated quite a bit of technology to basically make their homes work. They're going to build foundations. They're going to sink posts to work as counterbalances for support beams. They're going to have a lot of different types of windows and doorways that are designed to spread the weight of the stuff above into smaller places. And this is, of course, going to take a lot of time and a lot of trial and error for them to establish these sorts of building procedures. But this is pretty neat stuff, and I would really love to go out to see a lot of this stuff because I've never been out there. Cave Geek, who is here in chat, spent some time earlier this summer going to some of the cliff dwellings that were out in the area, and it's a mark of jealousy. I wish I were out there. Obviously, they were angles, or at least they had angels, because the T-shaped doors are why they built this stuff on the cliffs. Right. Yeah, they got to fly up there because ladders obviously don't exist, right? You almost went there. Interesting. I would love to go to Chaco Canyon. How did they know what year Jesus was born? Well, Okay, well, I probably shouldn't keep that line of thought going. But anyway, it was too far, so you went to Canyon de Shell. Yeah. I gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and say it. We still don't know what year Jesus was born. And I can guarantee you that it wasn't year 1. So anybody that tells you Jesus was born in the year 1 isn't actually doing good history. They're just saying what somebody else told them because it wasn't year 1 at all. There's not really any defense for it. So, was this architecture imported when the people first came to the Americas, or did they invent it after they were already there? This particular style was basically they came up with it naturally. There was some connection between the southeastern portion of the United States and the larger cultures that were down here in central Mesoamerica. But their cliff dwellings are pretty standard. If you look at how should we build a house, there's it's kind of like parallel evolution, where there are just best practices that you learn over time if you're going to build a building, and you sort of figure out like, oh, this is just the best way to do it. And people figure this out, over time. Oh, it would have been the year 0. Next, I apologize. That's right, the year 0. Yes, because everybody knows that we have a year that's called 0, and nothing else happened during that year except for Jesus. Most likely 4 or 3 BC, if you're looking at the actual best guess for when Jesus would have been born. Not 1, and there was no year 0. You didn't see any ladders in the diagram. Well, obviously, it was wrong. What up, Prof. Laura? Good to see you, my friend. Hope you're having a good one. If you all are interested in talking with somebody smart and watching some video games, you should go check out my friend Prof. Laura, who's been playing a lot of Bloodborne lately. Played some Lies of P, which looked like a pretty interesting game, and I'm interested in it. I'm not going to get it because it's still like $60 or $70. Go give Prof. Laura a follow. Dude's real smart. He knows sociology as well, also knows a lot of philosophy, so the same kind of stuff that you could bullcrap with me about, you could bullcrap with him about too. So go do that thing, hit that button. It's like watching Edge of Tomorrow. Fair enough. I dig it. If somebody was asking about like building stuff, who was that? Cliff. Okay, so here's an up close picture of how they would have actually built some of these buildings. Now, if you think about Pueblo stuff, you might also go like, well, I thought the whole thing was made out of adobe. Well, some of them were. Some of them were also made out of rock. And you see this sort of stuff very frequently. This is at a place it's actually in Chaco Canyon, but it's one of the various dwellings of Chaco Canyon, which is actually a whole cluster of things. But this particular location is called Peñasco Blanco, or the White Plateau. And it's a pretty important site. We'll pull it up here on the map in just a second. We'll sort of zoom in and get ourselves a closer look at it. So, Peñasco Blanco. So right angles in architecture are a result of physics and not art. Probably a safe bet to say. That doesn't look like Peñasco Blanco at all. It's way too green. Plus, it's also not on top of a hill. Hey, there we go. That looks a little bit more accurate. Hey, look at there. There's our site. So, in the Pueblo 2 culture, there are a couple of different places that are going to be really big and really important. One of them is Chaco Canyon. And if we can go to the ground here, because I know we can, this is one of the earliest sites at Chaco Canyon. And it doesn't look like very much today, but if we remember that they're building this, more than 1,000 years ago, it gets pretty impressive. And when we're talking specifically about people that don't have a lot of building materials other than dirt and rock, again, pretty impressive. So you can still go see this today. You can take a hike up this bluff to see all of these things. Chaco Canyon is going to become one of the biggest population centers of the Pueblo 2 culture, but it really sort of hits its biggest stride in the 1000s, so about 100 years after what we're talking about. And one of the biggest spots that happens to be sort of active during this time period, our 10th century, is a place called Kettle, which I hope it will take us there if I just type this in, because it's just right around the corner. Yeah, here we go. All right, so Kettle. Well, first, I guess what I should do is I should show you this image. So if we're looking here, this is a layout of the site of Kettle. And you can just notice we've got all of these buildings. They're aligned along streets, and we've got a couple of central... these large circular buildings are what's called kiva. These would have been meeting places for cultural gatherings, for just hanging out with your friends, for religious ceremonies. There's a thing here at Kettle called the Great Kiva, and we'll look at that in just a little bit. But you'll also note here that they've got things like moats, because one of the things that's becoming very common, I guess you could say, in the Pueblo 2 period is that these people have really started figuring out hydrodynamics. Living in the middle of the desert means that water is always going to be at a premium. And if you're going to have centers of habitation that are this size, that can have, all of these different numbers of homes and dwellings, you're going to have a fairly stable food supply. And to grow food in this area where it's hot and arid, you're going to have a stable water supply. So you start seeing people in the Pueblo 2 cultures that are going to develop catch basins and rainwater traps. You're going to see them start building reservoirs, and they're going to start building aqueducts that are much more efficient and lose less water as they're moving the water from point A to point B. They're going to figure out things like silt deposits and how they can use silt deposits that are running down off the sides of mountains to fertilize crops. They're really going to get good at this, and this is what's going to allow their populations to grow enough so that they can support these cities. So if we look at what's left here of Kettle, you can see here this is our Great Kiva, and I'm pretty sure, because I've looked at this myself, that we can walk around here. Yeah. So thank you, Google Earth. So this is a pretty big cultural site here. You can see that this would have had enough room for quite a few people. You would have had meetings here. You would have talked with people here. This would have been something that you could have done as a particular ceremony, maybe coming of age stuff, maybe religious stuff. But you also see that there are smaller ones that are around the area. There are about a dozen of these scattered across Kettle. So these are smaller kivas here. And around the back, of course, along the wall here would have been all of the individual dwelling places. So it's a pretty important site, and Chaco Canyon itself is a site that's just absolutely peppered with locations. This whole region right here is Chaco Canyon itself, and the water supply that runs down here is what's called the Chaco Wash. The Chaco River itself is just right over the hill, but during periods of time where there is rainfall, or this area does get a little bit of snow. Usually it snows 3 or 4 times a year here. When the snow melts, it'll wash down into this area here, so there is ability of the people to catch the water and retain it and use it. So Chaco Canyon, really cool place. I would love to go there. Before I had to put a roof on my house, there were some plans that Cave Geek and I had to maybe try to get out to see this over the summer, and then the roof thing happened and nobody was doing nothing. Except Cave Geek went out and got to see all the cool stuff because he went without me. And I'm very jealous of that, but I don't begrudge him the opportunity. So back in March, we had to put a new roof on the house. And that was $17,000 because it turned out that the people that did the roof before we bought the house did it badly. And they ended up having to replace the shingles, the decking, the fascia boards. Basically, they had to pull everything off down to the studs and rebuild the roof. So, thanks, people that owned the house before us. We were in a lucky enough spot where we could pay it, but it was not fun. I did not care for it at all. Should have had them raise it while they were at it then. Raise the roof. Same thing happened to us. It was not fun. Yeah, man. It's there's a lot of benefit to owning a home, but there's also that whole thing where you've got to pay for all of it. So, another big important site for our Pueblo 2 culture is a place called Mesa Verde, which is in Colorado. The Mesa Verde National Park is actually the largest archaeological-based national park in the United States. And it sits right here between these two rivers. There's the Colorado River and the Monco River, and another thing that's called the Navajo Wash. That's another one of these wash basins. But it's basically all of this stuff right here is in the national park. And inside of this national park, there are about 600 different buildings. Now, of course, the buildings weren't all built at the same time, and they weren't all inhabited at the same time. But there were some of them that were around during our particular 10th century time period. And one of those is what's called the Step House. It's called the Step House because you can see that it's built back into this cliff, and it's built on levels. Levels, Jerry. Levels. And you can see here that they've got some circular buildings as well, some kivas of their own, and there are some other larger structures back here in the back that would have been used for dwelling places. The Step House is one of the earliest sites that would have been inhabited in the Mesa Verde region. There were pit houses that were discovered at this site that go back to about 600 AD, so even 300 years or so before we're talking about now, there were some smaller wood buildings that would have been houses at this location. So obviously here you're picking up the big cliffside as a way to provide yourself some shelter from the elements. You're going to make sure that you can catch the rain coming off of it. You stay away from some of the storms that roll through this area. You keep the snow off your head, that kind of stuff, right? You can still go see all of these as well. Well, not all of them. I think there are about 10 different sites that you can go see in the Mesa Verde Park. As of about 2 years ago, most of them are now under protection, which means that if you want to go see them, you have to arrange a guided tour. This is because some idiots went into some areas and defaced some petroglyphs and broke some wall pieces down because people obviously are idiots and we can't have nice things. So you can't just walk out to them now. You have to go with a certified park ranger and a tour guide. And some of them are pretty decent hikes because they're fairly separated from each other because they're going to be doing farming in a lot of these areas. but the farming itself isn't going to be completely able to sustain their population, so they are going to have to augment their diets with hunting and gathering. So you can't have a lot of people right up on top of each other, because otherwise you would exhaust the food supply in the area. So some of these are fairly remote. You know, you might have to hike in some pretty rugged terrain for an hour to get to some of these. But you can still go see a lot of them if you really want to. And I would absolutely love it. My in-laws have been to some of these, and I'm jealous. I think everybody knows that I want to go see all of the stuff, though, right? So again, just generally hear about our Pueblo II period. We're going to see some improvements in agriculture. Obviously, we're going to still need to do hunting and gathering. There are going to be some periods of time in the population centers of all of these areas that are part of the Pueblo II culture that are going to show some food scarcity. You're going to see their populations drop. You're going to see a lot of people that die from what's likely malnourishment. And this is sort of a weird thing to do, but you can actually tell if somebody dies in really bad nourished states by looking at their teeth, specifically the wear on their teeth and things like the density of their bones and things like that. So there are quite a few Native American remains that have been studied from this area, and you can tell that at various time periods where there probably just wasn't a lot of rain, the population did drop. So it's a stable sedentary population, but it's not to the point where it's developed a strong enough hold on its agricultural production in order to support a larger stable population. But like our Eastern Woodlands groups that are over in the Mississippi River Valley, come next century, they're going to blow up. And the Pueblo III period is very frequently referred to as like the golden age of the Pueblo culture. So you're going to see like just a ton of new big buildings, and a lot of the really, really cool things are going to be in the 1000s, 1100s, and 1200s. So I know that I'm telling you like, hey, there's some cool stuff here, but it gets cooler next time. But that's unfortunately the way that this works when we're doing things by 100-year sections. This is actually a good point where I could go like, wouldn't it be cooler if I could just say, let's talk about the Pueblo culture and their period of time, and we talked about the whole area, and I showed you all the places at once. Yeah, see, this is what I'm talking about. I think this is why we need to do the format change, but I don't think it's going to be scary or bad, because I think it's going to end up helping a lot. So there's that. All right, let us talk about our largest kingdom of the time, and they are the Toltec. I'm teasing you. Yeah, it's not like I meant to do it on purpose, but it's the way that it works with the current format that we're on. We're trying to do things century by century, and we've been talking about the 10th century now for several months. It would be cooler if I could just show you all the Pueblo stuff. But, you know, there we go. All right. So first off, what's going on with the Toltec and why are they so big? Well, we've talked about the Toltec before, and they were one of the central Mexican powers that are going to gain a new level of independence and regional autonomy after the collapse of this big city right here, Teotihuacan. Now, if we go back to the 400s, 500s, 600s, and even into the 700s a bit, Teotihuacan would have been the dominant power in this whole area, and even some down into this area, under a hegemony where they basically ran the show. But Teotihuacan falls apart, and that's going to allow for the Toltec to really start kicking in. Now, you can see here that they have a smaller region right around here that's centered around where Teotihuacan was. They're not actually inhabiting the city very much at all. Their capital is at this location right here called Tula. But they have sort of a heartland, and then they have an area of influence. So the people in this region would have been sort of tied to the king that would have lived here in Tula. And now you do see also down here this green area that was Mayan, and we'll talk about the Maya civilization and the Maya people here in just a little bit. All right, Prof. Laura, take it easy. But we're going to talk here about the Toltec Empire first. Now, there's a bit of a debate about whether or not you should call it the Toltec Empire or the Toltec culture, the Toltec kingdom. I prefer kingdom as a way of distinguishing it from an empire, mostly because the people that they're really going to rule directly were very similar to them. Places that are under my influence aren't necessarily the same as vassals that I rule. If I know that I can go beat all these people up and I can sort of sometimes tell them what to do, that doesn't mean they're part of my empire. That means that they're smaller kingdoms in my area that I can push around because I have the big stack at the table, right? That's not necessarily the same as an empire. That's my interpretation of the situation. There are other people that are very happy to call the Toltecs an empire. The map that I just showed you called the Toltecs an empire. You can do your own research and look all this stuff up if you want to. But let's move down here to the Toltecs. And again, these are going to be people that are in the same world as our Maya and our Teotihuacan people and some of the other groups that were perhaps previous to that, like the Zapotec. But the people here at Tula, which is kind of spread out and it's hard to see, there's a lot of stuff that's not particularly very well preserved. I've got some better pictures that I can show you here in a second. Well, I guess I can just go ahead and show you this. So these are the big pyramids that are at Tula. They're just referred to as like Pyramid A and Pyramid B. But, you know, these are the sort of big standard Mesoamerican pyramids that you would have expected to see from Maya or a later Aztec group. This picture up here should have grabbed a better picture of it itself. But on the top of this particular pyramid, there are these really big monolithic carvings of people. So these totemic images of humans. These would have been potentially kings or maybe anthropomorphized versions of the deities. There's a lot of speculation as to that. But you see here again your big plaza, which would have been a road that was surrounded by big buildings where we would have done ceremonial stuff. We would have had government decisions, and we would have done our good human sacrifices because the Toltec did do some good old-fashioned human sacrifice. Now, what's going on with the Toltec? When are they actually around, and when are they actually in power? It's a good question. There are lots of different opinions, and there are lots of different interpretations of what's actually going on. Some people say that as soon as Teotihuacan started falling apart, the Toltecs were able to declare themselves independent and establish a dominant regional power, and they want to date them all the way back to like 650. I think that is a little bit generous if we're just being honest. I don't think they would have been completely able to dominate the people around them at that time period. So other people want to say 850, which is a little bit more believable. But what happened in those intervening 200 years, you know, it's hard to say sometimes. What about when they ended? And that's another thing that we can dispute. When they sort of fell apart, we don't really know. If you want to classify it one way, it's when the city itself of Tula goes dormant and loses its population. Other people want to say it's when the trade networks fall apart. There's just a whole bunch of debate about this. And obviously, historians are going to argue about things because it's one of the things that we can do. Nobody is alive from that time period to tell us, so that means we can argue and flex our muscle and debate whether or not 1 year difference is such a big deal. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, though, if we're just being honest. Anyway, so they're going to grow in influence after the fall of Teotihuacan, and when we last discussed Central America, one of the things that we talked about was the collapse of the really big Maya civilization. Now, there are still going to be people that are Mayans, and there are going to be people that are living in some of the cities that would have been part of the Maya civilization. But their central authority is going to collapse during the 800s, and we're going to enter what's referred to as the post-classical period of Mesoamerican history. The post-classical period is notable for a few reasons. First off, there are going to be some really, really big population shifts. And typically what's going to happen is the population is going to shift away from cities. Now, there's a lot of arguing about why it shifted away from cities. Some people want to say that there was a big plague that went through and wiped out a lot of the people in the cities because you're closely packed, you spread contagions faster, etc. Other people say that it was because of over farming and the fields that you were farming weren't being taken care of properly with things like fertilizer being left to rest, and you over-farmed the ability of your land to produce food, and then your food supply plummets. Other people want to say that it didn't rain. Other people want to say that it was warfare. Regardless of why it's happening, cities are becoming less populated. Now, that doesn't seem to be happening at Tula, and the Toltecs are going to benefit from that. And it also means that they're not going to have as many people to fight. It's a lot easier to run a kingdom when you don't have really big, powerful neighbors. When you are the biggest kid on the block, you can run the show a lot more easily, right? There's also going to be a growth of metalworking during this period of time. You're going to start seeing a lot more gold and silver stuff that gets produced at some of these sites. I realize now after saying that I should have found some gold stuff that was made at Tula to show you, and I didn't do that, and that was my bad. You're also going to start seeing a shift in some of the governments of the cities that survive. And this is actually really interesting. There's a lot of political theory that goes into this, and there's a lot of sociological theory that goes into this, but I'll try to explain it the best way that I think it makes sense to me. This is a little bit opinionated, so I probably should put on the opinion hat, but I think it's grounded in enough logical fact that it's not a spurious concept, and it's not just a bad correlation of evidence. But the theory sort of goes like this. When you have fewer cities and you have less overall threat to the stability of your city, it becomes less important to have one person that can make quick, decisive decisions, because you have time to react to things. It's not like you're constantly at war and you need somebody calling the shots from the top all the time. And what it looks like happens in some of the cities that survive into the early post-classical period is that you get a little bit more of a government by a group. You might see some small groups that act as sort of a nobility or an upper class, and they rule kind of by, not necessarily by democracy, but more like by group decision. And you see really interesting individuals that cross boundaries. And one of them is actually a pretty interesting Toltec king. And for the sake of not trying to type this, because everybody knows that I can't type and talk, I'll just copy and paste his name in. But his name is Secatl Topiltzin Quetzalcoatl. That's his name. I know that, the good Adventures in History joke is you're going to go run off and name your firstborn that now. But the name means our prince, one reed, precious serpent. Now, the inclusion of Quetzalcoatl is really interesting here because that was the name of one of their gods. You may know Quetzalcoatl. You may have seen images of this. It's like a flying, flowery headed serpent thing that's associated with lightning. And including that as part of his name was interesting because the sources that we have that describe him are going to call him a priest king, which is an interesting thing that doesn't really have too many examples or doesn't necessarily even have a direct parallel with other Toltec leaders. So why a priest king? Well, if we look at the nobility that were running cities, a lot of these people were associated with the religious rites. So if this guy was part of the religious sort of cleric group that kind of already ran the show, it's not too big of a surprise or too big of a suspicion to say that he may have left just the priest behind and added king to his title. But anyway, this actually is a pretty interesting dude. He ruled from 923 to 947. And he's going to be the ruler during a lot of the period of Toltec expansion. It does appear that during his rule things were very stable, and that he was able to have a lot of success when it comes to establishing trade routes. You're going to start seeing trade routes that stretch all the way up Mexico back into the southwestern part of America. So that's a pretty long trade route through some not necessarily easy terrain. But you do start seeing trade connections between our people here in the Pueblo II culture all the way down here in the Toltec sphere of influence. So that's a pretty big deal. You also see this really interesting shift away from human sacrifice. So according to the sources that we have that describe this guy, he said that the gods didn't actually like human sacrifice, which seems to be a bit of a reversal of the previous, almost 1,000 years of Mesoamerican history. There are a lot of people that wonder why exactly he did this. I have a guess, but it's based purely on speculation and not a lot of evidence. So this really should be an opinion hat guess. My guess, and let me be very clear that this is a guess, is that because he claims some level of priesthood and some level of political power, he may have wanted to delegitimize the other members of the priesthood, or to lessen their influence in the culture so that they didn't try to challenge him for his position. That's a speculation on my part. Again, that is a speculation. I don't know that for sure, but it kind of makes sense if you look at where he's coming from and why he said what he did. Because obviously the priests were going to be the ones that oversaw the human sacrifices. And that was a pretty big part of the day. Like you wake up, you stumble around, and you go see some human sacrifices, and then you go to work, and it's just boring all day, and you maybe go see some more human sacrifices at the end of the day, and it's kind of like the highlight of your day, right? So you don't necessarily want the priests, who are basically your connection with the gods and the entertainment, to push you out of your position if that's where you are. But again, this is just purely speculation. It's smart boy speculation, but it's not to be taken as legitimate. Neat way of taking the voice of a god. Yeah, and he was the representative of the god by taking the name of the god onto himself. Also, welcome, Allie. So, if you all are not following Allie Briggs, you should. Allie is also proudly wearing the artist badge and is the illustrator of our lovely Chonky Horse emote. And does really amazing artwork that you should go watch whenever Allie gets back around to streaming. Taking a little bit of time off because of Dragon Con calm down and convention stuff, but Allie will be back, and you should go follow. Let me catch back up with chat. What up, Frank Big Time? Good to see you. I know it's the wrong scale to consider it, but you expect that over time, groups who don't sacrifice people are going to outcompete groups who do sacrifice people? That's an interesting question. I could think of at least two examples quickly that would not support that particular theory. One of them, most obviously, is the Aztec. The Aztec people were dominant in Mesoamerica for hundreds of years, and they sacrificed lots of people. Now, obviously, they got beaten by a group that doesn't sacrifice people, the Europeans, but it's also fair to note that the Europeans had guns, and we all know what happens when people with guns fight people without guns. We all know what happens there. I don't think that's a fair comparison. Also, the Romans sacrificed a lot of people. and they were really, really successful for a long time. So, and they were actually more successful if you want to look at it as pagans than they were as Christians, because they Christianized in the early 300s and they collapsed fewer than 200 years later, and they had been around since 800 BC. So from like the 800s to the 300s AD, 800s BC to 300s AD, they were pagan and doing quite well and sacrificing humans, and then they stopped, and then fewer than 100 years or fewer than 200 years later they collapsed. So maybe, I don't know, that was perhaps a bit more snarky than it needed to be. Some supervisors who could make the workday more interesting. They say leadership is service. Interesting. Attention, everyone. All human sacrifices from this point forward are now vegan friendly. Alas. Alas. It feels like sacrifice has just changed in methods to match the society change. Yeah, and that's fair. If you want to look at it in a certain perspective, our current structure of outsourcing our industrial capacity to foreign countries where humans are kept in near slavery or actually slave labor conditions and worked to death is sort of human sacrifice so that you can have an iPhone 15. If you want to look at it from a certain perspective. We're just not sacrificing to the gods anymore. We're sacrificing to the brands. When all else fails, resort to human sacrifice. Yeah, maybe so. There's a really cool place that I went to in Greece, on the island of Crete. It's called Anemiospila. And it was a temple that was collapsed during an earthquake. And what's really interesting is that we know that it was collapsed during an earthquake because we have a document that says it was collapsed during the earthquake. And during the excavation, someone found a priest in the process of doing a human sacrifice. So it looked like there was this really horrible earthquake, and one of the priests was like, oh crap, we have angered the gods for real bad. We need to do a human sacrifice. And then they went to do the human sacrifice to appease the gods, and the temple collapsed on them. So there you go. There's no limit to what you can do with waves of endless disposable slave labor. Yeah. That reminds me of a quote from the bad guy from an old webcomic called Way of the Stick. And I think the quote was something like, there's no problem that can't be solved by sacrificing minions. Yeah, access denied. Your sacrifice is mediocre. Do not accept. They grabbed the wrong person to sacrifice. It was just it was one of my ancestors, and everybody knows that my family is just not appeasing to the gods. God money actually grants wishes, though. I don't get the reference God money. I probably should, but I don't. Evil God grants wishes if you are the priest and you wish your rival would get sacrificed. There we go. There we go. Right? Be the change you want to see in the world, right? That is not Shane endorsing human sacrifice, by the way. Let's talk a little bit about the Maya that are still in the world at this time. Again, if we go back to our map, there are still some Maya around at this time, but they're mostly down here in the Yucatan Peninsula. A lot of the big cities like Copan and Tikal had actually pretty much become uninhabited, or people were living in the ruins. The only big city that's really still working pretty well is Chichen Itza. Uxmal is doing not so great, but it's okay. But overall, the Maya cities are not doing great. Chichen Itza is declining during this period of time. We still really don't know why. There are other cities that are trying to, still be cities, but a lot of these that used to be really, really big and were just absolutely huge are going to sort of fall completely, untended. They're just going to disappear as centers of habitation. And again, this is something that I talk about, like, just because we have these big cities, like, so if you've seen any of the Star Wars movies where they're at Yavin 4, those big structures were Mayan structures, and they had enormous amounts of technology. They had a writing system, they had a calendar system, they had culture that stretched back hundreds of years, and then they disappeared, right? The concept of structure and culture and civilization always moving in a steady upward arc is not accurate. Culture doesn't always move upward. There were periods of time in lots of places where you had these really big cultures and then they just sort of fall apart. And there's nothing that takes their place. It's not like one culture crumbles and then another culture comes in and takes over all their cities and keeps things running. The Mayas sort of stopped living in cities. And even Chichen Itza, by the time we get to the 1000s, is not going to be really habited. And this is a city that used to have 30,000 people in it. And it's just not going to exist anymore. So human beings and civilization don't always play nice with each other. And systems can collapse. We're not invincible. We should not believe that just because it has been this way for memorable history that it will always be this way. Are any of their cities not named after strings of syllables we say when food's too hot for our mouth? Well, I mean, some of them are named in modern Spanish, but some of them are names that later, like Teotihuacan. We don't actually know what the name of that city was. Teotihuacan is an Aztec word in the Nahuatl language that means like home of the gods. And we call it Teotihuacan because the Aztecs called it that. We don't actually know what the word for that city was back in the day. So the Mayans had Cloud City. They thought that was India. Got any big picture theories on the rise and fall of civilizations? Humans are prideful, intelligent idiots. We can do great things, and then we get way too convinced of our own brilliance, and then we realize that we're actually idiots and we're too far gone to fix it. And then we have to fall flat on our face, and then we have to rebuild it again because we can be quite brilliant, and then we'll get convinced of our own brilliance, and then we'll be idiots again, and we'll fall flat on our face. It's a human condition. It's something that we've watched happen time and time again in human civilization. Most of the big civilization collapse things came from the fact that people were ignoring obvious issues, and people were believing that they could react to things instead of being proactive about things. And no, it doesn't work that way. You don't fix a problem by waiting for it to happen and then hoping that you can scramble to fix it. You fix a problem by seeing it coming and then prevent it from happening or lessen the impact of it happening in the first place. And when cultures get very prideful, they think that things are easy street, and they just sort of sit back and relax, and they don't think very much more about the future because they just assume it's going to be comfortable. And that's when they miss the big things. And that's what happens. And we can see this happening time and time and time again. And it's happening right now. We are in the comfortable idiot phase of our cycle. And I don't know if that means that we're going to have a gigantic systems cultural collapse in my lifetime. But I'm not also saying it's an impossible potential thing that's going to happen. We are not immune to systems collapse. Well, it isn't mentioned the average temperature of the planet rose about 2 degrees from Fahrenheit from around 750 to around 1000, from 1 degree below 20th century average to 1 degree, then approximately another 0.5 degrees between 1000 and 1200. It could have. It could absolutely have done so. This would have made different areas habitable, and it would have made some areas uninhabitable. So that could have absolutely affected things like crop growth, vegetation coverage. This could have affected seasonal cycles, right? It could have affected water and rainfall cycles across the area depending on how hot the water was in places like the oceans. Obviously, our area here is surrounded by water on all sides, so there you go. The mighty Maya Empire defeated by cottagecore. No, it wasn't cottagecore. It was more like hunter-gatherer core. It's a great cycle. Yeah, that is the great cycle, Junk Collector. Ask any historian, sociologist, or anthropologist for a big picture theory about the field, and it usually boils down to people are dumb. I mean, it's because we are. Individuals can be intelligent, but people are idiots. Just in general, people are idiots. They don't act logically, they don't act rationally. They act greedy, and they act in benefit of themselves. And that is exponential with the growth of the group. The more people you have, the more likely they are to act greedily and in self-interest. And it acts inversely proportional as the group gets smaller. That's just the way that it works. It's the way that human beings work. Just because we're in big groups doesn't mean we're not in scared big groups. Congress is it absolutely is a perfect example. It really, really is. It's a great example. You put 535 people together, and they're going to be more idiotic than if you're trying to deal with a few of them at a time. Now, that doesn't mean that individuals within Congress can't be more idiotic than others, and I think we all probably could list a group of people that are in Congress that are idiotic, but I don't think we have to go there right now. But yeah, that's it. All right, so let us zoom down a little bit and talk about our last areas down here in South America. And we have talked about two different groups down here before. And let us start with the Wari. And some people refer to this as Huari. Same group of people. And they are in the sort of northern region that is in modern-day Peru on the Andean mountain range. I don't know what the Goldilocks number is. I've never actually thought about that particularly. But the Huari at this point, that we've been talking about these guys now for about 400 years, but they have had all that they can take. And by the time we get to the early 900s, all of the big Huari cities, including Huari itself, are going to be depopulated. The central government is going to fail. The trade networks of the Huari Empire are going to dry up, and the monumental architecture is going to cease happening. And at that point, by the early 900s, maybe you can stretch that to 1000. The once powerful Huari Empire is going to be no more. Same sort of thing that's going on in a lot of these other places. People move out. They're going to move back into more hunter-gatherers type lifestyles. They're not going to grow as many crops. But the Huari are going to go bye-bye. And that's unfortunate, because I like these people a lot. Now, what's interesting here, during this time period in South America, it's referred to as the Middle Horizon period, which sounds so dumb. I don't like the phrasing here. What's the Middle Horizon? Right? If the Middle Horizon is where things are collapsing, it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't like the terminology, but this is what everybody has decided on, I guess. Anyway, this is during the Middle Horizon period, and this is the same sort of period as what's happening in places like the Mesoamerican area, where we're seeing people depopulate cities. They're moving away from centers of habitation. They're moving back towards more smaller population, hunter-gatherer lifestyles, and the cities aren't coming back. They're just not coming back. I heard of them. Dan Everett co-wrote a grammar of their language. I take it that they are much diminished now. Yeah, so there are still people that are related to these people that are around, but they're going to be a very small ethnic group. They're mostly in isolated areas up in the mountains, and a lot of those people are going to intermarry with later groups that go on to form the larger Inca Empire, but that's not for another couple hundred years. The Middle Horizon was inside you the whole time. Yeah, whatever. What's up, Noger? If you are not following my friend Noger, you should. Noger is a smart dude that reads really smart papers or sometimes really dumb papers, depending on how the wheel turns. But he's a philosopher, and he reads philosophy papers on stream. And if you think that's not really what you want to do because it would be too far out of your ability to handle, no, it's not. You should go watch Noger and let him explain stuff for you. He's really good at breaking things down in ways that makes it very approachable, even if you don't have a philosophy background. Also, we kind of like to dunk on the papers a lot, and it's pretty cathartic sometimes to recognize that, yeah, my paper might have got rejected, but at least it didn't get published and look as dumb as some of the papers that Noger reads, right? Middle Horizon, isn't that just the next to the Event Horizon? I hope not. That was a trippy movie, and also I don't want to get sucked into a black hole, so... what's unfortunate is that a lot of this culture gets sucked into a black hole. And this is also true for the other culture that we've been talking about down here in South America. The Tiwanaku. They are further down south. They're in what is modern-day Bolivia and the northern part of Chile. And to a little bit over here, it's actually in modern-day Argentina. I'm saying all these countries as if everybody has a photographic memory of geography. So this is Bolivia. This is the famous Lake Titicaca, which had some Tiwanaku structures built around it and in it. So this northern part of Chile right here, and then sort of this little northern basin part of Argentina. This is where the Tiwanaku culture was located. And we've been talking about them for about the same amount of time as we've been talking about the Huari, because they were this really interesting combination of friendly empires. They had recognized each other's natural boundaries and sort of let each other be and just traded and were nice with each other. But Tiwanaku is going to hit its peak around 900. And it's going to start to decline pretty quickly after that. And we know this because we start seeing fewer trade goods being produced, and we start seeing farmland being left fallow and being reclaimed. And by the time we get to about 1000, all of the big cities of Tiwanaku are going to be depopulated, except for some of the stuff that's down in Argentina and in northern Chile. And it does look like there are some people there that were colonists of Tiwanaku, or some native people that had intermarried with colonists of Tiwanaku, that are going to go on to start a few smaller cultures, especially in northern part of Chile. But overall, the Middle Horizon period is not kind to our friends in South America. The two biggest powerful cultures in South America are both going to basically evaporate. Shane still needs his eyes to see Pueblos. Yeah, pretty much. People with PhDs aren't always as smart as you might think. Oh, I know. I've taken classes from many of them. PhD is the epitome of stubbornness. I agree. PhD is just a standard measure of how long you can bang your head against a wall. Oh, that's a good one. That's poetic. Approximately 6 years, right? That's really good. That's really good. So philosophy PhDs are double? Yeah, so philosophy and doctorate of philosophy... Oh, God gracious. A doctorate of philosophy in philosophy. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting times. Anyway, that is going to wrap up our view of the Americas during the 10th century. Some stuff is leading up to some really, really cool stuff, and some of the stuff is leading to periods of time where there's not a lot going on. And it's interesting how the areas that used to be powerful are not so powerful anymore, and areas that were sort of going through this transitionary period have kind of come out of that and are going to build bigger cities. The situation going on in North America is quite different than the situation going on in South America. And it's just really interesting for me to put this stuff together, but that's just sort of the way that I do things. You have higher degrees in not philosophy, and your diploma definitely says in not philosophy. Hey, not everybody has a certificate that says that they don't have donkey brains. It's just degree and not degree in X. That's fair. What's up, Foggage? How's it going, my friend? All right, so that's all for me. But of course, that doesn't mean we have to run away. If anybody has questions about any of this material, or if anybody wants to redeem any channel points, now is a good time to do that. It's a degree in Y. Ha 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 ha, like X or Y. Ha ha ha. Yeah, I gotcha. I followed the joke. What's in the news? Allie, do you have something specific that you want me to talk about, or do you just want me to pick something? Same thing for tuna. Do you just want me to pick something, or you just want me to do something specific? I need to change those, and I need to make 2 of them. And they would cost the same, but one of them is what's in the news, you tell me, and one of them is what's in the news, talk specifically about this. There's actually a philosopher, Francois Laurel, who claims to be writing non-philosophy. Interesting. I don't even know what non-philosophy is. How do you classify non-philosophy? Something cool and not doom. Okay, we can do that. So I'm not sure if everybody is a member of the Discord, but if you aren't, you can follow that cool link right there, and you can join the Discord. And I shared something, and then Tuna shared another version of it that's easier to access. That's a really cool historical discovery, and we'll talk about that for just a little bit. So let me switch back over here to my website viewer. So in Zambia, there was a 500,000-year-old wooden structure that was unearthed. Now, first off, this is what it looked like. So you're thinking like, holy crap, a wooden structure. This is like, a house or something. It's not that cool, but it is kind of cool. It's basically like people built some logs and they carved some logs to kind of fit together. Like, this is actually great because later on here they use like Lincoln logs. And they say, look, this is what it looked like back in the day when they built this. And so this is what they dug up, and they used these Lincoln logs to distribute it, or to describe it, rather. Now, what's interesting about this are a few things. First off, it's very old. So it dates to about 400,000 years ago, 476,000 years. That's a long, long time ago. That is before Homo sapiens existed. Even our oldest possible guess at how old Homo sapiens are really only pushes them to about 300,000 years ago. 476,000 years ago is way too old to be Homo sapiens. Now, that by itself means a lot of things. Anything that we find, aliens, bro. Yeah, it's aliens, exactly. So anything that we find from this far back is going to be interesting because we don't have a lot of data from this time period. We don't have a lot of human remains. Well, I mean, we don't have any Homo sapien remains. We don't have a lot of hominin remains. We don't have a lot of even stuff like tools or stuff like that. We know what sort of tools that they made, and we have more of them than just 10 or 15. But it's not really common to find this stuff that far back. It was for religious purposes, obviously for religious purposes. But this was built by a species that wasn't Homo sapien. And when they were able to build something like that, what this means is they had a capacity to plan and think and design that might actually be greater than what we had given them credit for. We don't actually know which species did this, and it's probably never going to be something that gets completely solved or proven, because there weren't any human remains or hominin remains literally on top of it or right around it, because this was just a location. Now, there are some speculations. Some people say that this is a Homo erectus site. Some people say that it could have been Homo naledi, but we really don't know who it was. We don't know which of our ancient ancestors made this structure. But it's really cool to think that there were beings that were somewhat like us, but not exactly like us, that had the capacity to think about chopping down trees and cutting them to the same length and building these notches so that they fit together well, and then raising that up off the ground, perhaps as a sleeping platform, perhaps as some sort of stopover because it's right by a river. We don't actually know what it was for, but they fired the logs, which would make them more durable and more long-lasting. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on here that's a fairly high level of technology for the time period that is going to eventually cause us to have to rethink a lot of what these people could do. And that's really cool. All right, so let me catch back up here in the chat. Viper has a PhD in memes. There we go. Azerbaijan is rocketing the Armenians again. Since the stream has started, because they called a ceasefire yesterday. You had a PhD prof in environmental science class working towards a master's. Told me you could drill a well anywhere in Michigan to get water. Told him he was wrong. Brought him the proof the next week. Never talked to me again. Yeah, that sounds believable. So Tuna wants to talk about Armenia. That's cool. We can do that in just a second. Let me catch up. You definitely thought it was going to be phallic iconography. Could have been. They had the capacity, all right. They did. This far back involves a lot of guessing. It does. Very much. A lot. Definitely dinosaurs. Way after dinosaurs. Someone got stuck in the past. Perhaps so. Yeah, I did. I saw Tuna's. He wants me to talk about Armenia. Oh, the lizard people from Doctor Who. Or it could be the reptites from Chrono Trigger. Because, they had a whole civilization before Chrono wrecked it and destroyed their god. So, there we go. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about Armenia and Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh. So, let me turn on my borders and zoom over here to the Caucasus. All right, so Armenia and Azerbaijan share a border. Now, what's up with that border? First off, that border was largely created during the Cold War by Russia. And when both of these countries were a larger part of the Russian sphere of influence in the USSR, as well as Georgia, the country just north of them right here, Russia played a lot of politics trying to keep these people in the position of hating each other, because as long as they hated each other, they didn't hate the Russians. And for a long time, Armenia and Azerbaijan were sort of on opposite sides of the Russian love. Armenians were Christians by faith and therefore got a little bit more presence from the Russians, a little bit more love for the Russians. But when the lines got drawn, there is a region. If we zoom in here, where is it? It's one of these little exclaves. Well, how about this? I just used the search tool and it just pulls me straight there. Okay. So, is it going to give me a border? It's not going to give me a border. Okay. I don't know why. Okay, well, I guess technically I do know why. Anyway, there's a region right here called Nagorno-Karabakh. And it's a mountainous region that has some valleys that are sort of isolated and pretty far up in the hills. And when Armenia and Azerbaijan were split into independent countries, mostly under the auspices of Russian design, there were a lot of Armenian people and entire Armenian communities left inside of Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan is not very friendly with the Armenians. They're a different ethnic group, they are a different religious group. They have a very different outlook, sort of globally speaking. And the Armenians have tried over the course of the last, since like 1991, to get various groups of international countries, including the UN, to recognize that this region of Nagorno-Karabakh should be properly attached to Armenia, either as an exclave, which is a part of a country that's surrounded by another country, or by some little like road access easement sort of deal. Because the region itself is almost completely Armenian ethnically. They speak the languages that are spoken in Armenian. They're ethnically related to the Armenians. They're religiously closer to the Armenians. So they would fit better inside of the Armenian world. Azerbaijan, of course, says, no, this is in our territory. We don't like you anyway. Russia's a giant jerk. We're going to keep all of our land. You can't have Nagorno-Karabakh. Well, this has over time split into quite a bit of fighting and some open violence. And this has been sort of boiling for about the last 3 or 4 years. And a couple of days ago, there was a showdown where the Armenians inside of Azerbaijan that are living in Nagorno-Karabakh had decided to cause some trouble and do some shooting. And the Azerbaijani military was gearing up to basically crack down on the entire region and lock it down and bomb them into oblivion. And the Armenian country, of course, was crying out for international aid to try to get everybody to recognize that what was about to happen was potentially going to be classifiable as a genocide. And what ended up happening is that the Armenian ethnic group inside of Nagorno-Karabakh basically gave up to the Azerbaijani and made a ceasefire agreement. But the situation isn't solved. This is one of the leftover lingering issues of the Cold War, where the borders that were created at the end of the Cold War didn't line up with ethnic identities. This is the same sort of problem that happened in places like Yugoslavia, various places in the Balkans, various parts of even Ukraine, right? So it's a big mess that is unfortunately so far out of what you might consider the central problems of the world that a lot of people aren't going to pay a lot of attention to it. And a lot of people don't want to get involved because Russia's involved. So that's unfortunate and not really that great. Sharing borders is always a bad idea. What's up, Fall Machine? Good to see you, my friend. Out of curiosity, if you were to do a History of Gundam series, how many streams would it take? A lot. So there's different timelines. If I just did the Universal Century, which is the sort of main timeline that has most of the stuff in it, it would take a lot of time. 25, 30 streams maybe to do the Universal Century. I mean, I could do an overview and get it done in 3 or 4, but it would be really fast. And it would just be like, and then these people killed all those people, and next. There's a lot of Gundam stuff out there. A lot. I mean, there are, in the Universal Century alone, there are 4 seasons of TV shows that are full series, which means that they have 50 episodes. So that's 200 episodes of Gundam just in the main series. Unicorn has 10 episodes. There are 4 or 5 movies. So movies are F91, 2 Thunderbolt movies. That's 3. There's Charge Counter-Strike, or Charge Counterattack. That's 4. I forgot some of the other miniseries. War in the Pocket, that's got like 8 episodes or 6 episodes. And there's Stardust Memory, and I forgot Gundam Narrative. That's another. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in the Gundam world, and that's just the TV shows. There's just that much manga. And that's just the Universal Century. That's not the After Colony timeline. That's not the current timeline. That's not the... I can't remember what they called the Double O timeline, where Gundam Double O happened. The Universal Century. No, that's not right. Anyway, there's a lot of Gundam stuff. All right, what's in the news between Canada and India? We'll talk about that in just a second. Give me a second. There's also a view that the Russian influence that was keeping fighting happening has weakened. This is questions Russia's... Yeah, so the whole thing with Russia is always going to be questioned right now because we don't know actually how strong they are. We don't know what's going on with their ability to project their power anymore, because one of the things that they used to have is this giant military that they could sort of swing around. But I'm pretty sure that everything that they have right now is pretty much committed to fighting in Ukraine. So who friggin' knows? Who friggin' knows? There's a giant mess with Russia right now, and eventually the world's going to have to get off their thumbs and realize that they are going to have to take a decisive stand. And either they're going to say, we don't really care what Russia does, we're more interested in preserving our economic stability at the cost of innocent people's lives, or Russia is bad and we're going to have to stop them even if it hurts. And I don't think people really want to make that decision, because what they want to pick is, we're just going to sacrifice Ukraine because we care more about our economy. Okay, so what's going on between India and Canada? All right, so earlier in the week, there was a guy in Canada that was a Sikh activist from India. So the Sikh are a religious group that you might reference by wearing big turbans, and the fact that they don't believe in cutting their body hair, so they typically have like really long mustaches and really long beards. They're a particular religious sect in India, and they traditionally have not necessarily been the biggest friends of the current ruling Indian government, because the current ruling Indian government, of course, is run by a party that is a group of Hindu nationalists, and the Sikh have not always gotten along very well with the Hindus, nor have they gotten along very well with the Jains or the Buddhists too much either. And it's mostly because the Sikh have been targeted out for persecution quite a bit, and they've been forced to defend themselves against constant attack and attempts to wipe them out. When you're constantly being under the threat of imminent destruction, it's pretty common for you to feel like you're persecuted and retaliate. I don't think that there's a lot of finger pointing that could... Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Many Sikh in Canada do shave, though. They are less observant. Interesting, Lumpy. I did not know that, and that is really, really interesting. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Anyway, so there was a Sikh activist named Nijar, and he was born in India, and he moved to Canada, and he was speaking out a lot, especially in the last couple of years, about the way that people in India were being treated, especially the Sikh minority. And this guy ended up shooting him outside of a temple. And this is going to be the first domino that falls in this larger argument between Canada and India, because Canada starts investigating the murder, and the government of Canada starts to sort of, according to the information that has been released, a lot of this is still speculation, a lot of this is still very, very fuzzy. I'm not trying to speak authoritatively here because I don't know if we can be authoritative, but Canada's government has claimed that India's government was directly involved in Nijar's assassination. And that's a pretty big claim because this means that India's government is assassinating people in foreign countries, which is it's bad enough when you're killing people in your own country, but when you're sending operatives to another country to kill people, that's a whole different level of messed up. And there's apparently a lot of information sharing that has been going on. And Canada has been sort of watching some of these people. And there's a larger group that has recently become fairly powerful as a way to sort of combat China's expanding power in Southeastern Asia between New Zealand and Britain and Australia and the United States and Canada. And after looking at some of this information that Canada gathered from external sources and their own internal investigations, they leveled these allegations against India. And of course, India's response was, no, we didn't kill this guy. You're full of crap. And then India made a public statement about how dumb Canada was. And now, I think just earlier today, Canada has expelled the Indian diplomats from the country, which is a pretty big, middle finger kind of thing. And I think, and I haven't read all of the stuff from today, I'm a little bit behind on the news. I think India has claimed that Canada had been surveilling their diplomats in the first place. Like, they had kept them under some sort of very quiet hush-hush observation, which is kind of weird. I'm Spartacus. Grethar. Good to see you, my friend. And thank you so much for that subscription. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome. Trudeau went public because a major newspaper was going to publish the story, and it would have been worse for Trudeau's image. Oh, interesting, Lumpy. That's interesting. So he did it so that he didn't get one-upped and outed. He was trying to control the narrative. That's interesting. Interesting indeed. Anyway, that situation is turning into a diplomatic nightmare. I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what's going on in that situation. I'm sure that there will be continued escalation. I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of backs and forths and things like that. It's commonplace among nations. Diplomats are spied upon. Everybody does it. Fair enough, but India and Canada were supposed to be on really good terms. And it doesn't seem like they might be on as good of terms as they seem to have implied. But that's what's going on in the news. Yeah, so we've been streaming now for a while. We've been going on for a bit. But that's cool. I dig it. Anybody else have any questions or want to redeem any points or anything like that? We have invasion plans of Canada. That was something that came out a few... was that under Bush 2 or was that under Obama? That somebody leaked an official American invasion plan of Canada. I can't remember when it was. Oh, that was Trump's plan. Okay. So yeah, his in the news was about the India-China thing. Not India-China, the India-Canada thing. I thought everybody was supposed to be on good terms with Canada because, Canada, right? Oh, they're so nice, eh? Oh, they're just so nice. Nobody wants to spy on Canada. Canada, the world's older brother. That's just what Canada wants you to think. That's fair. That's fair. All right. When I is an old Victoria way of saying, sorry you had to listen to me. Let's go do a raid. I think it's time for us to do a raidy raid. You don't like seeing my nation's children fighting? Well, the problem with that, DCI Banks, is that your nation's children are like everywhere, right? We're gonna go raid Rhinus Leatherworks. Rhinus Leatherworks is a husband and wife duo that make really, really friggin' cool stuff out of leather, and they're just delightful people. And I met them a couple of years ago during a streamathon where I was trying to help raise some money for some charity stuff. So let's go see them. They're currently working on Imperial Knight armor. Yeah, safe for work leather stuff, like cosplay leather stuff. But they're really cool, and they're very, very skilled and very talented at what they do. So let's go hang out with Rhinus Leatherworks. The next time that I'll be on, for sure, is Tuesday next week. We've got a viewer request stream about history of calendars, which is going to be interesting. Of course, I would love to stream over the weekend and build some Gundam stuff, but that's always up in the air. I never really know for sure. But until the next time that I see you all, take it easy, have a good one, yell adventure when we get to the raid, and share some emotes, and I'll see everybody next time.